We're really pleased today to have Sarah Melton speak. She's an administrative assistant at Central Fire District in Santa Cruz County over a Live Oak there. And she's going to talk about the history of the Central Fire District, but also some of the histories of some of the other districts around over time. So take it away, Sarah. Thanks a lot for coming.
All right, thanks for having me. Yeah, and if anybody thinks of any questions they want to ask me later, they can put it in the chat too. I can read it and towards the end start answering some of those questions. But yeah, like you said, I am Sarah Melton, and I've been with the fire department. Started with Aptos La Selva as a temp in 1998 and permanent in 99. And I continued with them all the way to the consolidation with Central Fire, which finalized in February of 2021. I've been working on the history project for a few years now, getting information on all of the different departments that made up Central Fire and how they came to be. So this one right here, the photo, as I was saying earlier, is of the old Soquel Volunteer Fire Department in the 1950s. And there was a cherry plant on fire behind there that they were trying to mitigate and save the residences surrounding it. But more on those later. Let's get started with Central Fire District today. Central Fire District today serves a population of approximately 90,500 people, 55 square miles all the way from the edge of Live Oak to the end of La Selva. And as you can see, it kind of the border goes off into a lot of the rural intermix area, as well as covering a lot of the coast of Santa Cruz County. So it is Live Oak, Capitola, Soquel, Aptos, Rio Del Mar, and La Selva Beach. We have 7 different fire stations, one office that's our administration and prevention office, and a training headquarters in Aptos, and a fleet services building in Capitola. And our fleet services, they service not only our own fire equipment, but all of the fire equipment in the county. Other departments will take their stuff to us to get serviced. And so it's pretty big all hazards district. Clicking over here, we currently have about 120 staff members. We are an all hazards district, which means we can do medical, fire, rescue, hazardous materials response. And we have a very robust community outreach and public education program, station tours, special presentations, events. We do a defensible space inspections. In the spring, we have seasonal inspectors that go out to your house and help you mitigate hazards around your home and keep it protected from wildfire, and regular commercial inspections as well. And as I mentioned before, we have a countywide fleet services. So this is just some of the people that we have working for us right now. Now I'll start with going into the early fire history of the area before we had any organized fire departments. I started with Soquel because Soquel was a particularly hazard-prone area. They had a lot of businesses down the main strip, still do. And there's a photo here showing Soquel Village in the 1800s, and the Oddfellows building, the larger 2-story building, actually had a very crucial part in the formation of the fire district. Because before we had an organized fire, members of the Oddfellows were actually the volunteer firefighters. And it was convenient because the only real water connection there was in that area was the connection that's in that building. We didn't have a lot of fire hydrants. We didn't have too much access to the creek that was there because you'd need a long hose to be able to pump the water out of that. So they had hand-drawn carts, they had horse-drawn equipment, and a lot of the Oddfellows volunteers were also the volunteer firefighters. We didn't have an organized emergency system at that point. There would be a bell to ring, or people would reach their neighbors door to door to come out and fight a fire. And there were a number of major fires. The Pine Apple Shed Fire in 1897 caused a lot of damage, and there was a blacksmith shop fire. You can imagine there was a lot of heated elements there that would cause them. And the business district often had its buildings destroyed and rebuilt again just because of how fast fire could spread in that time. I do have a separate presentation I do for the schools once a year on Charlie Parkhurst because there is a connection to Charlie and the fire service. You might notice if you've ever been to the Soquel station, there's a plaque showing that Charlie had registered to vote at that building. And he was also a member of the Oddfellows group. And so because of that, he may have been, it's not verified, but may have been part of the volunteer fire service that came out at emergencies like this. Although at the time that he was part of the Oddfellows, he was getting on in age and had a considerable amount of arthritis. So probably not much of the physical firefighting was done at that time. Now, this is some of the large amount of fire issues that the downtown Soquel area had. In this one, they said the Soquel fire does $100,000 in damage, which is actually pretty significant when you think about inflation from then. And that was one in which the Oddfellow Hall itself got quite a bit of damage. And when you have things like a straw barn or a blacksmith or different the paper mill and things that are just really highly flammable, but not a lot of water resources and not a lot of organized fire help, it's hard to mitigate that kind of hazard. And there was a lot of talk, a lot of news articles of people trying to form a volunteer fire department, but it's hard to get the funding for it and hard to get the organization for it. So it shows here like they had relied on bucket brigades and neighbors and volunteers picking in to try and stop it from spreading farther, but it was definitely an issue. Capitola also had its issues. It had some flooding issues just being close to the beach. It was really popular with tourists even then, and they had a volunteer fire department that was not official yet, but it had been mentioned as early as like early 1800s. And it, sorry, a little, let me grab my notes on this. So they had large amounts of crowds, tourism, fishing, boat races, and a robust boardwalk. The largest fire that cost $20,000 in damage, they needed help from Santa Cruz Fire. They needed help from neighboring districts to try and mitigate it, but response times were pretty slow at that time. And so they lost a lot of structures. And they did have a chemical apparatus at that point, a hose cart, which helped save residences nearby and had 2 hydrants available. So Santa Cruz Fire assisted after about a half hour after that fire started. And there was a lot of debate on how that fire started, but the point was they really realized at that point that they needed to have a stronger, more organized fire service. Live Oak was that area between Santa Cruz and Capitola, in between these 2 gulches. And they were primarily rural. A lot of the organization for the fire department, the talk of it, started with the local Grange Farmers Collective talking about the need to protect them. There was a large fire at a poultry plant there, which was a big deal because the Depression had affected egg and poultry production, and it was really a boon to the community when you had a large poultry farm operating there. But then when it sustained a lot of damage during a fire, it was a big hit to the community that was already struggling with depression. They usually relied on a Santa Cruz fire and from Capitola Fire District. Capitola and Soquel were working together as a volunteer fire, helping each other up until the formal organization in the 40s. Now, Aptos Fire, this is showing our first fire chief, Ralph Madison, and our first fire engine, the motorized one, which is purchased in 1930. And early funding for the volunteer fire departments, it wasn't done by government, it was done by communities. There would be groups like the Fire Auxiliary, Chamber of Commerce, the Odd Fellows, and independent business owners just gathering together, and they would have special fundraisers, card parties, dances, craft sales, and anything they could to raise money to get the fire protection equipment that they needed. At one point, the cement ship was used for a huge party for Aptos Fire, and they had a big band out there and lots of dancing, and was in the paper as well. And another thing they would do is they would have memberships for the department. If there was a certain area that wanted to have a fire service, they say, oh, well, you can support our fire department, but buy this membership in our department. And they would pay a regular fee that would help to pay for the equipment and the support of the firehouse that was there. And sometimes that firehouse was a borrowed garage or a building next to a larger business until we had regular fire stations that were established. So the Aptos Volunteer Fire Department was organized in 1924, but officially formed until 1929, because it's always a long process. This is one of the earlier patches for the Aptos Fire Department, showing like the water, the boating, the trees. And our Aptos La Selva Fire Department patch also had shown like some of the aspects of Aptos that made it unique. And Bayview Hotel had a building next to it, which was where one of our first Aptos stations were. They were hosted right outside of the fire department. And Red Cross had come and trained our firefighters in first aid. So we didn't have paramedics at that time, but we did have firefighters that were trained to do basic first aid, as well as putting out fires and water rescues and other types of emergency response. Now, La Selva Fire also had its volunteer fire department. This is one of their earlier trucks. This truck is from the earlier volunteer days, although the photo itself is from later because they were using it to promote one of their firemen's balls, as they called it, which is one of the many fundraisers they had. The La Selva Beach Fire actually had its own quartet that played music and did shows to help fund the fire department. And Live Oak Fire Department, that was one of the later formed volunteer departments. And a lot of the formations of the organized volunteer fire departments came across because of World War II. We had the civic defense that was formed, and as part of civic defense, a lot of the regular residents were taught in emergencies. They were taught in how to deal with like bombs, firings, planes coming down, and firefighting became some of the training that they received. And so it kind of became natural that they would also use that knowledge to form the fire departments. Now, let me see here. Sorry, my slides are a little rough on this. So Santa Cruz Live Oak Grange was established in 1932, and they originally petitioned for separate fire departments on the east side with leadership of C.S. Green, chairman of the fire committee. But the official fire department in Live Oak was helped by Les Gum of the forestry department. And they had trustees that oversaw specific areas of the district. The fire chief also served as one of the first board directors, which is something that can't happen now. They usually have to be separate, but at the time it was okay. And they only had 3 fire chiefs in the Live Oak history before they eventually merged with Soquel in a joint powers agreement. It started with Ralph Matthews, then Howard Hansen, and Richard Pound, also known as Dick Pound, was the longest serving fire chief. He went from 1959 to 1981. And then when they merged with Live Oak, Harry Rose served as the fire chief for the first 3 years of that. Live Oak did have its own challenges. At one point in 1967, their fire station was destroyed because a car had crashed into the building and broken the gas main and exploded. And so the entire building was engulfed in fire. One of the firefighters actually jumped into that burning building to help save the fire truck that they had just bought because he knew that was an expensive piece of apparatus. And they did manage to save that and eventually restored it back to its regular strength. But the fire station itself had to be completely rebuilt. And there was a manhunt for the driver of that vehicle for a long time, but they never actually found him. So then the fire department temporarily relocated to Bromer Street, 1310 Bromer Street, until a new structure could be built and until their fire engine could be fully repaired. Watsonville Fire actually loaned one of its new trucks to them to aid in their firefight. So this is some photos from Soquel Volunteer Fire Department. So they had tried to form in 1924, but became inoperative after a time. And like I said earlier, they did do mutual response. Capitola and Soquel worked together. They were kind of separated by geography, but they definitely did help each other as one department for a long time. In 1933, Soquel started talking about their own fire department. And a large part of the formation of the Soquel Volunteer Fire was due to the Negro family. Ray Negro, the fire chief, and Ernie Negro, assistant chief, was his serving. And they had a number of family members. In fact, we even have one of the Negro family members as a firefighter today in this district. And you get that a lot in the fire department. There's legacy families that have, you know, generations of firefighters taking part. And the school was right above the fire station, and often high schoolers would come down when the bell was rung to help volunteer to fight fires. And they didn't have the protective equipment we do now. You know, at best, they would have a leather helmet and some thick clothes, but they didn't have any breathing protection or anything like that. And this is showing some of the major disasters that happened: flooding, fire. And this 1948 Dodge Pumper was a big upgrade that everyone was quite proud of. Sugar the fire dog was a fun story, but really it should have been later in the slideshow. Sugar had a number of puppies with another dog that was named Gigolo. And all of the firefighters there took care of the fire dog, and many of them adopted those puppies. So the descendants of Sugar are probably all over the county right now due to the many firefighters that took care of them over the years. So this is more firefighter training early in the 60s. During the floods of 1955, the Soquel station took some major flooding damage. So the firefighters had to be relocated while they worked on a new plan. So this is a sketch of the the fire station that you see today in Soquel Village and what they had planned for it. They also had, oh, there it is, 1957. That was when the cherry plant fire was. They had also built from scratch this electric alarm map. So instead of just giving an address of where the fire was, hold on just a moment, please. There would be lights on the board that would actually show where they were going to the fire instead of going by word of mouth, and that was very convenient. And it was much later when they actually had a countywide dispatching system. So this was a big step up in the dispatching for the fire department in that area. All right, Capitola. So Capitola VFD. We said earlier, the Capitola Fire Brigade was found in news articles as back as 1895. And in the 50s, these were the photos of Cabello and Cabello took this one, and it's been around quite a bit, of the fire department and the work they did. This is the photo that is still in our main office, showing Fred Jarvis and Richard Huber. Jarvis was one of the chiefs of that department. They were initially running out of a garage before they could build their own station. And this was one of their original Capitola fire patches before the merger with Central Fire. This looks very similar to the Capitola Village Fire Department that's there today. There's been very little change on it. And yeah, it had a lot of, oops. It had a good proximity to the majority of the emergencies in that area. It did get a electric siren, which they had problems with at first because there were a lot of youths that were just coming right up to the firehouse and setting the siren off for fun. But instead of having a call go out and tell you this is the emergency and this is where we're going, it was kind of a coded system. Like one blast meant volunteers come to the firehouse, 2 blasts meant it's in the flat part of Capitola, 3 blasts means the fire's near Depot Hill. So it's just knowing the code of what those blasts mean as to where the fire was. It was rudimentary, but it did work. Consolidations happened. I have a note on this. So there was a proposition that passed in the 70s that made it so there were severe limits on how special districts could fund fire departments. It limited the amount of taxes they could have. It limited their ability to get those taxes approved. And so a lot of the local fire districts had funding issues and couldn't support their community in the way they would want. So this inspired a lot of the consolidation talks between Aptos and La Selva, between Live Oak, Soquel, and Capitola. And so this is showing the 3 major ones that helped us form the Central Fire today. So Live Oak formed the JPA with Soquel in 1981 with the final consolidation in 1984 and became the first Central Fire Department. Capitola Fire was on the fence about this for a while. They explored other options, including operating independently or joining with the city of Capitola as a municipal district, and then eventually joined back with them a few years later to be part of the Central Fire District. So this shows Capitola consolidating with Central Fire in 1987. And then in La Selva Beach, the VFD formed a JPA with Aptos Fire in 1985 with a full consolidation in 1986. They slowly moved from there being a volunteer department to all paid department, and later annexed La Selva Beach and did charge a small fee to the residents there to help pay for the extra services, and later annexed part of Day Valley to make for a larger district in that area. Here's the basic timeline of consolidations. So June 6, 1978 is when Proposition 13 passes, and it reduced the local property tax revenues by 53%, but put much larger restrictions. And so that's when the merger talk started. And I think I went over most of this already. But this is a photo showing the mid-county fire prevention as they were starting to consolidate into a larger area. The final consolidation, well, not final because there would be some future ones more likely. There'd been several attempts to merge Central and Aptos La Selva Fire Department over the years. There were talks in the 70s, the 80s, 90s. At one point, LAFCO had put a plan together to have all of the fire departments become one big county-wide fire department. That didn't work out though, because for a consolidation to work, everyone has to be on board. The firefighters and their unions, the chiefs, the board, the public, and you have to just kind of get the perfect combination of all of those people being on board and informed and on the same page for that to work. The consolidation with Aptos and Central was made a little bit more difficult because even though we had started on the same page for the most part, there was a lot of changes. We had changes in fire chiefs. We had differing contracts that needed to be molded with the two unions. And then we got hit with COVID-19 in the middle of the merger process. So that was also a challenge. And the CZU lightning fires and other disasters that really challenged the district, but at the same time also kind of solidified us into working strongly together. And so even though there were some differences, I think a great amount of those struggles we had with COVID and the lightning fires actually helped us come together stronger. And then in 2021, in February, we were finally confirmed as a consolidated Central Fire District of Santa Cruz County. Now, a brief thing about paramedic history. Aptos La Selva Fire was one of the primary inspirations for starting paramedic service. And we were kind of the test pilot. We started in a trial basis in April of 1978, and Dominican Hospital had gotten into an agreement with us and had an around-the-clock emergency base station, which they could dispatch out. Both Aptos Fire and Dominican had funded this project to train some of our firefighters who at the time already had some EMT experience, but paramedic is the next level up, more advanced healthcare. And so Terry Gritton, Phil Schofield, who later became the fire chief, and Greg Joseph, who retired as a battalion chief, became some of our first paramedics. And a lot of the other fire districts were watching this closely to see how that would work and see if it was something that they wanted to incorporate in their services as well. This is a funny bit of history. On their first day as trained paramedics, the first call they got wasn't really a medical call at all, but was some horses that had gone wild and run through the road. And so Greg Joseph, with his usual history, was like, what should we tell the doctor standing by the hotline radio? We have a 3-year-old female patient weighing 1,500 pounds. But they did get the horses rounded up and eventually started attending to real medical calls. And within the first 15 months of the test paramedic program, they responded to 338 medical emergencies, 115 of them needing paramedic level treatment. And the Aptos Chamber of Commerce declared the new paramedic team Men of the Year in December of 1979. And they spearheaded CPR classes to the public as part of their expanded range. In 1980, the Emergency Medical Care Commission proposed a county-wide program to the Board of Supervisors. Seattle had done something similar with ambulances strategically placed throughout the county. So that way we would have faster medical service, because as you know, when someone's having a heart attack or a stroke or other medical emergency, seconds matter. And two ambulance companies in town were included in the plan, one for the south area, one for the north area. And in 1994, much later, Central Fire District started pursuing their own paramedic service. And by 1998, this program was approved. And they started reaching out a bit at a time through their district to include paramedics. First Live Oak, then Soquel, then Capitola. And by July 2000, they had full paramedic service to all of the central fire areas. See? Water rescue. We had a number of different agencies outside of the fire department that would help with water rescue. There were lifeguards, Coast Guard, CalStar, because sometimes they would rescue in the ocean by helicopter, Santa Cruz Harbor Patrol, and I said Coast Guard on there twice. Great. But La Selva Beach was inspired to get their own water rescue equipment, partly because they had a very popular beach. There was a lot of clamming operation out there, and partly because one of their own fire personnel had actually drowned out on one of the beaches there. And it was an inspiration for the members to privately start funding their own water rescue efforts. And as fire became more involved with assisting some of these other agencies with water rescue, they started to develop their own skills and their own equipment. And right now we have a very robust water program. We have jet skis, we have joint training with lifeguards, and we have a very trained surf rescue team. And so it's been instrumental in a lot of the surf and cliff rescues in the beach area, especially around East Cliff and Aptos and La Selva. This shows some of the earlier fire apparatus and equipment. La Selva, this is actually one that was restored, and it's now at a history museum in Benicia. And they would just put water in here and hand pump it. And bucket brigades, often they would have a line of people with buckets, or they would have crews that would hold like a bunch of buckets on sticks and run to wherever it was. And we had a chemical fire apparatus. So instead of using water to pump, they would have different firefighting chemicals, which were slightly more effective in water, but there was like a tipping hazard that might cause some of the engines to explode, I heard. And so as that progressed, we got better and better at finding safer means of extinguishing fires, and fire trucks that could hold larger water capacity, longer hoses, and just get their response time out there much faster. This was a pumper they were very, very proud of, because the older one had gotten out of service to the point where it had trouble getting up some of the hills near Capitola. And this one was actually very good at navigating the many different locations. Sometimes there would be a couple of fire departments that would go in on one apparatus and share it. Ladder trucks were very expensive, and so it helped them to put their funding together to try and share equipment. All right. So I think we went through the flooding history. This is actually from 1931 in Soquel, where some of the area there got highly flooded. And we had storms. This is an Aptos in Moorhead Drive that would devastate a lot of the houses, especially those along cliff sides or near the creeks and rivers. This one I found interesting because, you know, everyone knows about the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. And in looking through my articles, I saw that there was a Santa Cruz Sentinel poll where they were asking people on the street, would you prefer a hurricane or an earthquake? And the timing of this was interesting. It was done about a month before the 89 earthquake. And there were residents saying, oh, I'd much rather have an earthquake because I kind of enjoy them and I've never been in a hurricane. I think hurricane would be scarier. And someone said an earthquake by far, it's not as sloppy a cleanup. We have earthquakes all the time with no damage, and there's more potential for damage with a hurricane. And then a month later, they found out how much damage an earthquake can do. And we had a lot of challenges in the 89 quake. The 911 system at the time was actually in the basement of the county building and was compromised. And it was very difficult to communicate. The hospital had a lot of challenges. Patients were rolling in their beds and trying to get enough resources to the right people at the right time. There were a lot of lessons that were learned in that response. Let me see. And so sorry about the sporadic. It's actually the first time I've attempted putting all this together and showing what information I have. And if anybody has questions they want to send me after this, my email is sarah.melton@centralfiresc.org. And that's our main admin office at the Central Fire District. And so I threw a humorous photo in here from a call in the 60s of a kid who got his head stuck in an iron bar on a stairwell. He wound up okay. But if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, and I can open it up for questions.